The message arrived during Earth's busiest news cycle, interrupting every broadcast across the planet. Children stopped playing in parks as emergency alerts flashed on their tablets. Workers in offices looked up from their desks as the familiar blue glow of holographic projectors filled conference rooms. Even the underground miners on Mars felt their equipment vibrate as the priority signal reached every corner of human space. Ambassador Crix appeared in perfect detail, his scaled purple skin gleaming under the artificial lights of the council chambers. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he read from an ornate scroll that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Behind him, representatives from dozens of alien species sat in neat rows, their faces showing the same expression humans had learned to recognize over 50 years of contact. It was the look adults gave to misbehaving children. By order of the Galactic Council, the species known as humanity is hereby commanded to surrender all military assets, disband all colonial governments, and submit to Council oversight within 72 standard hours, Crix announced, his translator making his voice sound artificially calm. This decision comes after careful consideration of humanity's recent actions, which the Council finds disturbing and potentially dangerous to galactic stability. In the White House Situation Room, President Williams sat at the end of a long table surrounded by his closest advisors. The room smelled of leather and old wood, a sharp contrast to the alien technology projecting Crix's message. Williams was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes, but those eyes were alert now as he listened to every word. The human expansion into 12 star systems without proper authorization demonstrates a clear disregard for established galactic law, Crix continued. Furthermore, humanity's rapid technological advancement and refusal to accept their designated role as a minor species threatens the natural order that has maintained peace for over 3,000 years. Defense Secretary Torres leaned forward in her chair. She was a small woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, but her reputation for strategic thinking made her one of the most feared humans in military circles. "Natural order," she muttered under her breath. "They mean their order." Intelligence Director Hayes nodded from across the table. He was younger than the others, barely 40, but his reports on alien activities had proven accurate time and again. "This was always going to happen," he said quietly. "The moment we started asking why we couldn't have seats on their trade committees, why our colonies needed their permission to mine asteroids, why we had to pay taxes on our own solar system." Admiral Brooks sat silently at William's right hand. He was an old military man who had fought in the last Earth Wars before first contact, and his scarred hands rested calmly on the table. Unlike the others, he didn't look worried. If anything, there was something almost peaceful about his expression. The message continued with a list of humanity's crimes against galactic stability. They had built too many ships too quickly. They had developed weapons that other species considered crude but effective. They had asked too many questions about council policies and demanded explanations for decisions that affected human lives. Worst of all, they had refused to stay in their designated corner of the galaxy. "The Council recognizes that humanity may feel this decision is harsh," Crix said, his 4 eyes focusing directly on the camera. "However, young species must learn their place in the galactic community. The Altarians learned this lesson 400 years ago when they attempted to expand beyond their assigned borders. The Vectori learned it 600 years ago when they questioned council trade regulations. Both species now enjoy peaceful, productive relationships with their council supervisors." Williams noticed how Crix said supervisors instead of representatives. The Altarians and Vectori weren't partners in galactic civilization. They were pets. "If humanity chooses to resist this lawful order," Crix continued, "the council will be forced to take military action. A fleet of 300 vessels representing 37 species is already assembling at the edge of your solar system. These ships carry enough firepower to reduce every human world to ash, but the Council prefers peaceful solutions." The message ended with formal legal language about surrender procedures and transition protocols. Human military forces would be disbanded, but former soldiers could apply for positions in the Council's security forces. Human governments would be dissolved, but former officials could serve as liaisons with their new Council administrators. Human technology would be confiscated, but scientists could continue their work under proper supervision. When the projection finally faded, the Situation Room fell silent. Williams looked around the table at faces he had known for years. These were people who had helped him navigate the complex relationship with alien civilizations, who had advised him through trade disputes and border negotiations, who had always believed that somehow humanity could find its place in the galaxy without giving up what made them human. "Well," Williams said finally, "I suppose that settles the question of whether they see us as equals." Torres pulled up a holographic display showing human military assets. 47 ships in the home fleet, maybe twice that scattered across the colonies. Against 300 alien vessels with energy shields and plasma cannons, it looked like a hopeless fight. "Mr. President," Hayes said carefully, "we always knew this day might come. The question is what we do about it." "Admiral." Brooks spoke for the first time since the message began. His voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "We do what humans have always done when someone tries to tell us our place in the world. We remind them why that's a bad idea." Williams studied the old soldier's face. Brooks had been part of the military since before first contact, back when humanity thought they were alone in the universe. He had watched 50 years of careful diplomacy and measured responses to alien demands. He had sat through countless meetings where human officials smiled politely while being told what they could and couldn't do in their own star system. "Admiral," Williams said slowly, "do we have options they don't know about?" Brooks smiled for the first time that day. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Mr. President, they've spent 50 years assuming we're just another species that will roll over when threatened. They think because we use kinetic weapons instead of energy beams, we're primitive. They think because we ask questions instead of following orders, we're difficult. They think because we've only been in space for a few centuries, we don't understand how the galaxy really works." He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the White House grounds. Outside, tourists were taking pictures and children were playing on the lawn, unaware that their entire civilization had just been given 72 hours to surrender. "What they don't understand," Brooks continued, "is that humans have been preparing for this moment since the day we realized the galaxy operates on might makes right principles. We smiled and nodded and played the role of the grateful junior species. But we never stopped being human." Williams felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What exactly does that mean, Admiral?" Brooks turned back to face the room and his smile widened. "It means, Mr. President, that in 72 hours, the Galactic Council is going to learn why humanity has never been very good at surrendering." Emergency broadcasts flooded every communication channel in human space as the 72-hour deadline approached its final day. News anchors spoke in grave voices about the largest alien fleet ever assembled, while reporters showed endless footage of families hurrying toward underground shelters. The images were heartbreaking. Mothers carried crying babies down concrete steps. Elderly couples helped each other through heavy blast doors. Children clutched stuffed animals as they disappeared into bunkers that hadn't been used since the old nuclear wars. Commander Vec watched these transmissions from his flagship as the Council fleet held position at the edge of the solar system. He was a career military officer from the Altarian Navy, chosen to lead this operation because his species had learned their own lesson about defying the Council centuries ago. His blue-gray skin bore the ritual scars of military service, and his 6 arms moved efficiently across multiple control panels as he monitored the human response. "Pathetic," muttered his second-in-command, a young officer named Rix who had never fought anything more dangerous than space pirates. "Look at them running to their holes like frightened animals." Vec said nothing, but something about the human behavior bothered him. In his long career, he had disciplined 7 different species for various violations of council law. Usually, there was some last-minute negotiation, some desperate attempt to avoid conflict. The humans had gone completely silent after their initial surrender deadline response, which had been a simple 2-word message: "We decline." The tactical display showed human defensive positions with painful clarity. Their entire home fleet consisted of maybe 40 vessels, most of them converted cargo ships with basic weapons. Earth's orbital defense platforms were decades old, built with technology that was considered outdated when most council species first achieved spaceflight. The human colonies were even worse off, with skeleton crews and minimal defenses. "Sir," reported his communications officer, a nervous Vectori with pale green skin, "we're receiving evacuation reports from all human worlds. Population centers are emptying into underground facilities. Military personnel are abandoning their posts. It appears they're preparing for occupation rather than resistance." This should have been reassuring news, but Vec felt increasingly uneasy. He had studied human military history during his preparation for this mission, and nothing he read suggested they would abandon their positions so easily. These were the descendants of a species that had fought 2 global wars using primitive chemical explosives and had somehow avoided destroying their own planet. They had built weapons capable of cracking continents and then had the discipline to not use them. That kind of species didn't usually give up without a fight. On Earth, the performance was flawless. Dr. Emily Watson coordinated the fake evacuation from a command center buried 3 miles beneath the Colorado mountains. Around her, hundreds of technicians monitored real-time feeds from across the solar system while maintaining the illusion of a civilization in panic. Every detail had been planned and rehearsed for years. "How's our Academy performance in the Jupiter system?" she asked her communications chief, a middle-aged man named Rodriguez, who had spent his career in military intelligence. "Excellent," Rodriguez replied, pulling up a holographic display. "The mining stations are broadcasting distress calls right on schedule. The freighter crews are following evacuation protocols. Even managed to stage a few accidents where ships appear to be breaking down under the stress of emergency departures." Watson nodded approvingly. The Jupiter system was crucial to their deception because it contained some of humanity's most important industrial infrastructure. If the aliens suspected that those facilities were actually weapons manufacturing plants, then civilian mining operations, the entire plan would collapse. "Status on the belt?" she asked. "All green," replied her tactical officer, a woman named Kim, who spoke with the calm precision of someone used to handling multiple crises simultaneously. "The prospectors are maintaining their cover. Long-range sensors show the alien fleet hasn't detected any anomalous activity among the asteroids." This was the most critical element of their strategy. For 50 years, humanity had been slowly hollowing out asteroids and installing propulsion systems. The Council fleet saw thousands of mining operations scattered throughout the asteroid belt, all appearing to extract valuable metals and rare elements. What they couldn't detect was that each of those operations was actually a weapons platform designed to look like civilian infrastructure. Watson walked to the main tactical display, which showed the positions of all human assets throughout the solar system. To outside observers, it looked like a desperate defensive arrangement by a species facing impossible odds. The truth was far different. Every ship, every station, every piece of apparently civilian equipment had been designed with dual purposes, from the moment humanity realized the galaxy operated on predator-prey relationships. "Ma'am," called out a young technician from across the room, "we're getting reports from our assets in Council space. The alien fleet commanders are growing." Confident, intelligence suggests they expect this to be over within hours of their final approach. "Good," Watson replied. "Overconfidence was always going to be our best weapon against them." She thought about the years of careful planning that had led to this moment. Humanity's first contact with galactic civilization had seemed like a wonderful opportunity. They would learn from advanced species, share knowledge, and find their place among the stars. Instead, they discovered a rigid hierarchy where newer species were expected to serve older ones, where asking questions was considered insubordination, and where technological advancement by junior species was seen as a threat. The Council had made their expectations clear from the beginning. Humans could colonize 12 systems, but no more. They could develop certain technologies, but others were forbidden. They could trade for alien goods, but only through approved channels that guaranteed the Council received most of the profits. Most importantly, they were expected to be grateful for this arrangement and never ask for more. For 50 years, human diplomats had smiled and agreed to these terms, while human engineers worked in secret to develop alternatives. They couldn't match alien energy weapons, so they perfected kinetic systems that could punch through any shield. They couldn't build faster-than-light communicators, so they created networks of hidden relay stations. They couldn't openly militarize their space infrastructure, so they built everything with dual purposes. "Dr. Watson," Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying a note of excitement. "Long-range sensors show the alien fleet beginning their approach. They're moving in standard Council formation, energy shields at minimum power, weapons systems not even charged." Watson felt a cold smile cross her face. The Council fleet was approaching like they were conducting a police operation rather than a military assault. They expected to overwhelm a primitive species through pure technological superiority, just as they had done to dozens of other civilizations over the centuries. "Send the activation signal," she ordered. "All systems, all platforms, all assets. It's time to show them what humanity has been building for the last 50 years. Across the solar system, receivers picked up a simple coded transmission that had been tested thousands of times in secret. On mining platforms throughout the asteroid belt, crews that weren't really miners began powering up equipment that wasn't really mining gear. On cargo freighters scattered between the planets, holds that weren't really carrying trade goods open to reveal weapons that didn't officially exist. Even on Earth's moon, facilities that were supposed to be research stations began extending, structures that had been hidden beneath the surface for decades. Commander Vec was studying casualty estimates when his sensor officer called out in alarm. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the human system. It appears the asteroids are moving." Vec rushed to his command console and felt his blood freeze. The tactical display showed hundreds of objects that had been classified as mining operations, suddenly exhibiting massive energy outputs. Worse, they were changing course, accelerating away from their orbital positions and moving toward the Council fleet. "How is this possible?" demanded Rix, his young face showing the first signs of real fear. "Those are civilian mining platforms." Vec watched in growing horror as the objects resolved into their true nature on his sensors. They weren't mining platforms. They were missiles. Massive, multi-billion-ton missiles equipped with fusion drives that could accelerate them to significant fractions of light speed. No species in the galaxy had ever considered using kinetic weapons on such a scale, because no one had ever been insane enough to militarize an entire asteroid belt. "Red alert!" Vec shouted across all fleet channels. "All ships prepare for combat. We are under attack by kinetic impactors." But even as he gave the order, Vec realized the terrible truth. The Council fleet had approached expecting to face primitive, human weapons. Instead, they had flown into a trap 50 years in the making, surrounded by weapons that their energy shields couldn't stop and their tactical doctrines had never prepared them to face. The asteroids kept coming, and Vec understood that his fleet had just discovered why humanity had spent so many years smiling politely while being treated like children. The first asteroid impact came without warning. Commander Vec's flagship shuddered as a mountain-sized rock moving at 12,000 kilometers per second struck the Council fleet's lead destroyer. The alien vessel simply vanished, transformed from a sophisticated war machine into expanding plasma and debris in the space between heartbeats. No explosion, no dramatic fireball like in the entertainment vids. Just there one moment and gone the next. "Shields up. All ships. Maximum defensive posture," Vec screamed into his communications array, but his orders were already too late. The human asteroid barrage was precisely coordinated, with hundreds of massive projectiles arriving in carefully timed waves designed to overwhelm any possible response. Ensign Rick stared at his tactical display in disbelief as another Council cruiser disappeared under the impact of what his sensors identified as a nickel-iron asteroid approximately 4 kilometers in diameter. Sir, how are they accelerating these objects to such velocities? Our physics models suggest the energy requirements should be impossible for a species at their technological level. The answer came from the human command frequency, broadcast. Openly, so the entire Council fleet could hear it. The voice belonged to someone called General Martinez, and it carried the calm confidence of a predator who had finally decided to stop pretending to be prey. Council fleet, you are witnessing 50 years of human engineering applied to a very simple problem. You build energy shields that can deflect plasma and particle beams. Congratulations! We build kinetic weapons that don't care about your shields. Another wave of asteroids slammed into the Council formation, and this time, Vec could see the terrible intelligence behind their targeting. The humans weren't just throwing rocks randomly into space. Each projectile had been aimed at specific ship classes, with trajectories calculated to exploit known weaknesses in alien hull designs. The Altarian heavy cruisers were being hit along their engine sections. The Vectori carriers were taking impacts directly through their flight decks. Even the massive Kalani dreadnoughts were being struck at the junction points where their modular construction created structural vulnerabilities. They know our ships, Vec whispered, the horrible realization settling over him like cold water. They know our designs, our weaknesses, everything. His intelligence officer, a scarred veteran, named Cole, nodded grimly as he analyzed the attack patterns. Sir, this level of precision suggests decades of study. They must have been analyzing our technology since first contact, cataloging every detail of our military hardware. The human broadcast continued, and this time the voice belonged to Admiral Brooks. Vec recognized the name from intelligence reports as one of Earth's senior military leaders, but the man's tone suggested he was enjoying himself far more than any professional soldier should during combat. 50 years ago, you made the mistake of treating us like children who needed to learn their place in your galaxy. What you failed to understand is that humans learn very quickly, especially when someone threatens our freedom. Vec watched in horror as his tactical display updated with new contacts. The objects his fleet had dismissed as civilian infrastructure were revealing their true nature. Cargo haulers that should have been carrying trade goods opened like flowers to release swarms of missiles. Mining platforms that should have been extracting minerals turned out to be railgun batteries capable of launching projectiles at relativistic speeds. Even the communication satellites orbiting human worlds began transmitting jamming signals that disrupted Council fleet coordination. This is impossible, Rix muttered, his face pale with shock. No species develops this kind of military infrastructure, in secret. The Council monitors all technological advancement. We have inspectors, trade oversight, diplomatic observers. Cole pulled up a series of intelligence reports that suddenly made terrible sense. Sir, look at these files. For 50 years, our inspectors reported that human industrial capacity was being used for civilian purposes. Mining equipment, cargo haulers, research facilities, infrastructure development, all perfectly legitimate activities for a developing species. Except they weren't developing civilian infrastructure, Vec realized. They were building weapons and disguising them as civilian projects. The human fleet, which had seemed so pathetically small just minutes earlier, was growing as vessels that had been hiding in the outer system revealed themselves. These weren't the converted cargo ships that Council intelligence had cataloged. These were purpose-built warships that had been constructed in secret facilities the aliens had never discovered. They moved with the precision of a military force that had been training for this exact scenario for decades. Admiral Brooks' voice came through the communications again, and this time there was something almost educational in his tone, like a teacher explaining a lesson to slow students. The thing about humans is that we've never been very good at accepting the word no when it comes to our survival. You told us we could only have 40 ships in our home fleet. You were right. We do only have 40 ships in our official home fleet. You never asked about our unofficial fleets. New contacts began appearing on Vec's sensors as human vessels decloaked throughout the solar system. Stealth technology that shouldn't have existed, operated by crews that shouldn't have been trained to use it, revealing the existence of a shadow navy that the Council had never suspected. You told us we could only develop certain technologies under your supervision. You were right again. We did follow those restrictions for our official research programs. But humans have always been good at finding creative solutions to artificial limitations. The asteroid bombardment intensified as more rocks revealed themselves to be weapons rather than natural debris. Some were fitted with multiple warheads that separated during their final approach, creating cluster munitions on an astronomical scale. Others released clouds of smaller projectiles that spread out to engage multiple targets simultaneously. A few of the largest asteroids turned out to be hollow shells containing fusion warheads that detonated at precisely calculated distances to maximize damage to Council ship formations. Vec tried to order a retreat, but his communications were being jammed by signals from across the solar system. The humans had turned every piece of their technological infrastructure into a weapon, including their civilian communication networks. Worse, the human vessels were moving to block possible escape routes, clearly intending to trap the Council fleet in the system until their kinetic barrage had done its work. All ships, emergency jump preparation, Vec ordered, hoping to use their faster-than-light drives to escape the trap. But even this option was denied to them as human jamming signals interfered with the delicate calculations required for safe hyperspace entry. The voice that came through the communications this time belonged to Dr. Emily Watson, speaking from her command bunker beneath the Colorado mountains. Her tone was professional and utterly without mercy. Council fleet, you are experiencing what humans call total war. This is what happens when you threaten not just our military or our government, but our entire way of life. Every human facility, every human ship, every human technology has been designed with this moment in mind. Vec's flagship took a glancing blow from a tungsten projectile the size of a small building. The impact sent shockwaves through the hull and killed dozens of crew members, but somehow the ship remained intact. Around him, other Council vessels weren't as fortunate. The proud fleet that had arrived expecting an easy victory was being systematically destroyed by weapons that operated on principles so simple that most galactic civilizations had abandoned them millennia ago. For 50 years, we smiled and nodded when you treated us like junior partners in galactic civilization. We accepted your trade restrictions, your technology limitations, your constant supervision. We let you believe we were grateful for the scraps of freedom you allowed us. Another wave of projectiles slammed into the fleet, and this time Vec recognized the targeting pattern. The humans were deliberately focusing their fire on command ships and communications vessels, trying to decapitate the Council fleet's ability to coordinate a response. What you never understood is that humans have been fighting wars since before we discovered fire. We know how to smile at our enemies while preparing to destroy them. We know how to turn everyday tools into weapons. We know how to make our weaknesses into strengths and our limitations into advantages. Vec looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers and saw his own shock reflected in their expressions. They were career military professionals who had spent their lives studying galactic warfare, and none of them had ever encountered anything like this. The humans weren't just fighting back against superior numbers and technology. They were winning. Council fleet, Dr. Watson continued. You came here to teach us our place in your galaxy. Instead, you're about to learn ours. The battle turned into a nightmare for the Council fleet as humanity revealed the true scope of their preparations. What had seemed like a simple disciplinary action against a primitive species became a fight for survival against an enemy that had turned an entire star system into a weapons platform. Commander Vec watched his tactical display with growing horror as more human assets revealed their deadly nature. The worst moment came when Earth's moon split open. It happened gradually at first, like the surface was cracking under some immense internal pressure. Then, massive sections of lunar crust began sliding away to reveal metal structures that gleamed under the reflected light of the sun. The construction was enormous, clearly visible even from the edge of the solar system where the Council fleet was dying. "By the depths," whispered Ensign Rix, staring at the images coming through their long-range sensors. They hollowed out their own moon. The structure emerging from beneath the lunar surface was a mass driver of unprecedented size, a magnetic acceleration system designed to launch projectiles across interplanetary distances. But this wasn't just any mass driver. The barrel extended for hundreds of kilometers into the moon's interior, and the projectiles it began firing were the size of skyscrapers. Admiral Brooks's voice crackled through the communications one more time, and now there was genuine pride in his words. "Council fleet, you're looking at Project Moonshot, 50 years of excavation and construction, all hidden beneath a few kilometers of rock and dust. We call her Luna Base, but her real name is humanity's largest rifle." The lunar mass driver opened fire and its projectiles crossed the solar system in minutes. Each shot was a solid tungsten penetrator weighing several thousand tons and moving at velocities that turned them into relativistic weapons. When they struck Council ships, the results were devastating. Energy shields that could deflect plasma, beams simply couldn't cope with solid matter moving at significant percentages of light speed. Vec's communications officer looked up from his console with wide eyes. "Sir, we're receiving emergency signals from across the fleet. The Kalani Dreadnought Righteous Purpose has been destroyed. The Altarian carrier group in Sector 7 has taken severe casualties. The Vectori battle line is requesting immediate withdrawal authorization." But withdrawal was no longer an option. The human vessels had moved to surround the Council fleet, and their jamming was making faster-than-light navigation impossible. Worse, long-range sensors were detecting identical energy signatures from other human colonies. The defensive systems that were tearing apart the Council fleet weren't unique to the Sol system. Intelligence Officer Cole pulled up a galaxy map that showed the true scope of human expansion. "Sir, we're detecting similar installations at all. 12 human colony worlds, mass drivers, kinetic weapons platforms, hidden fleet bases. They didn't just militarize their home system, they militarized every system they control." This was the revelation that broke the spirit of many Council officers. They weren't facing a desperate last stand by an overwhelmed species. They were fighting a peer military power that had been disguised as a junior partner for half a century. Every human colony was a fortress. Every human trade route was a supply line. Every human civilian facility was a potential weapons platform. The human strategy became clear as the battle continued. They had never intended to fight a traditional space engagement with energy weapons and shield technology. Instead, they had developed a completely different approach to warfare based on kinetic energy and overwhelming firepower. Their weapons were primitive by Council standards, but they were also unstoppable by Council defenses. Dr. Emily Watson's voice came through. The communications from her command center and her tone suggested she was reading from a prepared statement. "Council representatives, you are witnessing the result of 50 years of human military preparation. While you believed we were developing civilian infrastructure, we were actually creating the most extensive defensive network in galactic history. A new wave of asteroids struck the fleet. But these were different from the earlier bombardment. Instead of solid impacts, they exploded just before contact and released clouds of smaller projectiles that spread out like shotgun blasts. The effect was devastating against Council ship formations that had been designed to fight energy-based weapons at long range. Every mining operation in the asteroid belt was a weapons manufacturing facility," Watson continued. "Every cargo hauler was a stealth missile platform. Every research station was a military installation. Every human civilian you've observed for the past 50 years was actually a soldier in training. This last statement hit Vec like a physical blow. He thought about the countless diplomatic meetings, trade negotiations, and cultural exchanges he had witnessed between humans and council species. The smiling human representatives, the eager human students, the grateful human colonists, all of them had been part of an elaborate deception designed to hide military preparations on an unprecedented scale. How? Rix asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How did they coordinate something this massive without our intelligence services detecting it? The answer came from General Martinez, speaking from a human command ship that had appeared behind the lunar mass driver. The Council taught us that might makes right, that advanced species naturally dominate primitive ones, that the strong rule the weak. We learned that lesson very well. We just made sure you never realized how strong we actually were. The tide of battle was turning completely in humanity's favor now. Council ships that tried to retreat found their escape routes blocked by human vessels that had been hiding in the outer system. Ships that tried to fight back discovered their energy weapons were ineffective against human armor designed specifically to resist plasma and particle beams. Ships that tried to coordinate their response found their communications jammed by signals from across the solar system. The thing about humans, Martinez continued, is that we've been preparing for this kind of fight since before we left our home planet. We've fought wars against superior technology before. We've won against overwhelming odds before. We've turned defeats into victories and weaknesses into strengths more times than most species have fought battles. Vec tried to organize a final, coordinated attack, hoping that concentrated firepower might break through the human defenses. But even this desperate gambit was anticipated. As soon as the Council ships began moving into attack formation, hidden weapons platforms throughout the asteroid belt opened fire simultaneously. The barrage was precisely timed and targeted, designed to catch the alien vessels at their most vulnerable moment. Council fleet, Admiral Brooks announced. You have two options. Surrender now and your surviving crews will be treated according to galactic warfare conventions. Continue fighting, and we will demonstrate that kinetic weapons scale up just as well as they scale down. To emphasize the point, the lunar mass driver fired a single projectile toward the edge of the solar system. The tungsten penetrator didn't target any Council ship directly. Instead, it struck a small asteroid about 50 kilometers from Vec's flagship and completely vaporized it. The message was clear. Humanity had weapons that could destroy individual ships or entire fleets with equal precision. Vec looked around his bridge at the faces of officers who had believed they were conducting a simple police action against a primitive species. Instead, they had encountered something the galaxy had never seen before, a civilization that had disguised its true military power while systematically preparing for total war against a technologically superior enemy. Signal, all ships, Vec said quietly. Prepare to surrender. But even as he gave the order, Vec realized that the Council fleet's defeat was just the beginning. Humanity hadn't just defended their home system. They had demonstrated that they were no longer the junior species that needed Council protection and guidance. They were a military power capable of challenging the established order of galactic civilization. The galaxy was about to change, and humanity was going to be the one changing it. The surrender came exactly 6 hours and 37 minutes after the first asteroid impact. Commander Vec transmitted the formal cessation of hostilities from a flagship that was barely holding together, its hull scarred by near misses from tungsten projectiles and its crew reduced by half. Around him, the once mighty Council fleet looked like debris floating in space, with only 43 ships remaining from the original 300. The human response was immediate and professional. Medical vessels that had been disguised as civilian transports moved to assist damaged Council ships. Engineering crews that supposedly worked for mining companies provided technical support to keep alien life support systems functioning. Even the rescue operations demonstrated the scope of humanity's deception. Every civilian asset in the solar system had military training and equipment. 3 days later, President Williams stood before an emergency session of the Galactic Council on the neutral station known as Harmony Point. The chamber that had once buzzed with confident discussions about human limitations now sat in stunned silence. Representatives from dozens of species watched the human leader with expressions ranging from shock to outright fear. Williams walked to the central speaking platform wearing a simple black suit that made him look more like a business executive than a military conqueror. Behind him, holographic displays showed tactical readouts from the Sol system battle, including footage of human weapons that the Council had never known existed. The images spoke louder than any words could. "Honored representatives," Williams began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems, "I come before you today not as a supplicant seeking council approval, but as the leader of humanity's sovereign government addressing his peers." Ambassador Crix, his usually pristine diplomatic robe still showing scorch marks from his escape pod's emergency landing, rose from his seat with visible difficulty. "You cannot simply declare sovereignty. The established order must be maintained. The Council has governed galactic affairs for over 3,000 years. Williams turned to face the Villani ambassador directly, and his expression was polite but firm. "Ambassador Crix, with respect, the Council has governed those species that allowed themselves to be governed. As recent events have demonstrated, humanity chooses not to be among them." A murmur ran through the chamber as the implications became clear. This wasn't a negotiation about humanity's place in the existing hierarchy. This was a declaration that the hierarchy itself no longer applied to human space. The ultimatum delivered to Earth 3 days ago demanded our unconditional surrender based on the assumption that humanity posed a threat to galactic stability, Williams continued. That assumption was correct. We do pose a threat to galactic stability. We threaten the stability of a system where advanced species dominate primitive ones through superior technology and military force. Defense Secretary Torres stepped forward carrying a data tablet that contained humanity's new terms for galactic relations. She was no longer the quiet advisor who had sat in the White House Situation Room. Now she spoke with the authority of a military power that had just proven its capabilities. The Council operated under the belief that humanity was a minor species requiring guidance and supervision, Torres announced. Intelligence reports from our colonies indicate that 37 different species in this chamber have similar arrangements with the Council. Your governments were dissolved. Your military forces were disbanded. Your technological development was restricted. Your expansion was limited. She activated a holographic display that showed star charts covering a significant portion of the galaxy. Red zones marked areas under direct Council control, while yellow zones showed species operating under Council supervision. The blue zones representing truly independent civilizations were remarkably small. Humanity rejects this model, Torres stated flatly. We claim sovereignty over all systems currently under human control, including the 12 colony worlds and their associated mining rights, trade routes, and defensive installations. Any Council vessel entering human space without explicit invitation will be considered hostile. The chamber erupted in protests, but Williams raised his hand for silence. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. For 50 years, humanity accepted the role you assigned us because we were genuinely grateful for contact with galactic civilization. We wanted to learn from you, to trade with you, to find our place among the stars. But we also watched how you treated other species that questioned your authority. He gestured toward a section of the chamber where representatives from the Altarian and Vectori governments sat. Both species had been reduced to puppet states centuries earlier, their former independence now just historical footnotes. The Altarians attempted to expand beyond their assigned borders 400 years ago, Williams said. The Council response was swift and decisive. Today, Altarian children learn Council-approved history in Council-supervised schools while Altarian workers mine Council-designated asteroids for Council-controlled trade networks. The Altarian representative, a dignified female named Yera, kept her eyes downcast. Her species had once been explorers and innovators. Now they were administrators and technicians in their own star systems. The Vectori questioned Council trade policies 600 years ago, Williams continued. They wanted to negotiate better terms for their agricultural exports. The Council taught them that questioning authority was a luxury that minor species couldn't afford. Intelligence Director Hayes stepped forward with additional displays showing the true scope of humanity's intelligence network. For 50 years, human observers had been cataloging the fate of every species that had challenged Council authority. The pattern was always the same: military defeat, followed by political absorption, followed by cultural assimilation. Humanity chose a different approach, Hayes announced. Instead of challenging the Council openly, we smiled and nodded while secretly preparing for the war we knew would eventually come. Every diplomatic meeting was an intelligence-gathering opportunity. Every trade negotiation taught us about your economic weaknesses. Every cultural exchange revealed your military capabilities and limitations. Admiral Brooks entered the chamber wearing his full-dress uniform, the medals on his chest representing a military career that predated first contact with alien civilization. He walked with the confidence of a man who had just proven that human. Military doctrine could defeat superior alien technology through superior planning and preparation. The Council fleet that attacked the Sol system represented the largest military force ever assembled by galactic civilization, Brooks stated. 300 vessels, 37 species, the most advanced weapons and defense systems in known space. They were defeated by mining equipment and construction tools that had been repurposed for military use. He activated a tactical display, showing the current positions of human military assets throughout their controlled systems. The numbers were staggering. Every colony world was protected by defensive installations that rivaled the Sol system's capabilities. Every trade route was patrolled by vessels that could function as either cargo haulers or military escorts. Every human facility in space had been designed with dual civilian and military purposes. The age of Council dominance is ending, Brooks announced. Not because humanity destroyed it, but because we proved it was never as absolute as you believed. Any species with sufficient determination and planning can achieve independence from Council control. We're simply the first to actually do it. Dr. Emily Watson appeared via holographic projection from her command center on Earth. Even 3 days after the battle, she was still coordinating the integration of captured Council technology into human defensive systems. Her image flickered slightly as the transmission crossed interstellar distances. "The Council taught us that might makes right," Watson said, her voice carrying across the chamber. "You told us that advanced species naturally dominate primitive ones. You explained that technological superiority determines political authority. We learned these lessons perfectly." She gestured toward a display showing energy output readings from all 12 human systems. The levels were enormous, clearly indicating industrial capacity that far exceeded what the Council had believed possible for such a young civilization. What you failed to understand is that humans have always been very good at applying lessons to new situations. You taught us that galactic civilization respects strength, so we became strong. You taught us that political authority flows from military capability. So we built military capabilities. You taught us that the galaxy belongs to those willing to take it. So we're taking our piece of it. President Williams walked to the center of the chamber and activated a final holographic display. This one showed star charts extending far beyond human-controlled space, with dotted lines indicating possible expansion routes and resource extraction opportunities. The message was unmistakable. Humanity wasn't content with just defending their current territory. "The Council may continue to govern those species that choose to accept your authority," Williams said. But humanity will determine its own future. We will expand where we choose to expand. We will trade with whom we choose to trade. We will develop whatever technologies serve our interests. He paused to let the implications sink in before delivering his final statement. The galaxy spent 50 years teaching us that survival depends on strength, that freedom must be earned through victory, and that respect comes only to those who can defend themselves. Congratulations. We learned the lesson perfectly. As Williams and his delegation prepared to leave the chamber, the silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of life support systems. The representatives of dozens of alien civilizations sat motionless, processing the reality that galactic politics had fundamentally changed. Humanity had announced their independence, not with desperate pleas or angry demands, but with the quiet confidence of a species that had outgrown the need for anyone's permission to exist. The galaxy would never be the same, and everyone in that chamber knew it. The age of human expansion had begun, and it had started with a smile.